Procedural democracy and institutions. In modern political discourse, democracy constitutes a concept that is loaded with various myths to a great degree, and therefore discussions of prospects for and difficulties facing democratic society are frequently reduced to fierce ideological disputes. Such disputes don't really advance the resolution of complex problems existing in society, and often at best are simply exchanges of opposing opinions among various sides. Such discussions, as a rule, are used as a kind of ideological weapon aimed at pinning a label on the opponent and at putting forward against him a standard set of arguments of the epoch of the New Enlightenment. Usually, the question is about the precise dichotomy of we and they, where the concept we means the right to propagate and promote the best way of life. Such an attitude has ideological character because it is based on a preset purpose under which empirical evidence is backdated. A number of methodological problems in relation to democracy studies are analyzed. The author considers procedural democracy problems from the institutional and rational choice points of view. Analyzing advantages and disadvantages of such approaches, the author comes to the conclusion that the institutional features of the democratic structure have an important character. They include the variance of individual and collective strategies of social development, which involves a range of social options which are available for social actors. Problem of the free rider, which the procedural democracy tries to resolve, and failures of democracy, which are considered as a product of social structure. I believe that ideological understanding of democracy should be rejected and that we need more institutional studies of democracies. From the institutional point of view, the main interesting features in the analysis of democracy are, firstly, the variance of individual and collective strategies of social development, which involves a range of social options. Therefore, it is necessary to define which structural options are available for social actors. Second is the problem of the free rider, which the theory of collective actions tries to explain and predict some methodological and practical difficulties of possible resolutions. The last key issue is connected to failures of democracy. I mean not only external challenges which are stability threats for the social system, but also internal deficiencies of the structure, and first of all, the functional autonomy of formal and informal institutions of power. I will consider these important features in the same order. But at the beginning, it is necessary to define what the social option is and how it differs from the group or the public option. Social action is usually a kind of resultant of all individual actions, and in the given work, the range of social options is understood as the most widespread views about optimal ways of social development in society. In turn, social institutions act as a channels of their realization. This concept is wider than ordinary views about optimal social career paths. Strictly speaking, social options are structural factors, and they don't depend on will or desire of separate people. They are created by the distinguishing features of the social system development and, consequently, have a neutral character in relation to the concrete person or group, although the state plays an important role regulating access to them by restricting or manipulating them. Therefore, social options are pathways of the realization of social needs according to organized institutional structure. The presence of such options doesn't necessarily mean that all people can take advantage of them equally, and being in conditions of a total institution, like Goffman said, for example being in jail, a person can improve the realization of some needs considerably and worsen others, having ended in cooperation with its administration. Such options are based on the structure of the organization as a social institution, and they as a whole can be cancelled by the request of needs administration, not prisoners. In this case, institutional structure dictates its view. The person can agree with it or reject it, but he actually cannot offer an alternative. Certainly, in society total situations are rare enough, but the opportunity for social creativity is frequently limited, and then roads choose people. Thus, the first challenge for any political system will be to search for the answer to the question what should we do with that minority which, for whatever reasons, cannot take advantage of the options given by the social system. The structure of management and the system of positional advantages connected to it inevitably has a hierarchical character. The market of social achievements is organized in such a manner that there is a discrepancy between a number of people wishing to take an advantage of available lifts of social promotion and real swimming paths which lead to the desired purposes. The modern society offers a rather small range of social options. Therefore, many of those who realize the restrictions of the options in this competition rather early will reject the common game rules and will try to become successful by using unlawful, creative or criminal methods. If the social system doesn't want to permit explosions of open discontent and actions of civil disobedience, it should provide some additional ways of assimilation of marginal groups and outsiders. Assimilations or exceptions of minorities depend on the rigidity of institutional structures. It is important that people who are losers in the competition for social promotion on both average levels and the uppermost steps of the hierarchical pyramid have alternative roles. Rules should not apply too much pressure that it is too great, and dictate binary behavior, either change or leave, according to an old American saying, if it is too hot for you, get out of the kitchen. In this case, defeat will not be considered a full catastrophe and will become something like a temporary failure because the person continues to remain within the framework of the social system, or at least he has the hope of returning to it after some time. However, the problem here is that the purpose of some privileges and advantages given to the minority is not a leveling of starting opportunities in the hierarchical system. This is impossible. It is an indemnification for the unfair character of the distribution of social goods. The impossibility of equalizing of starting options for various groups will be explained later, but for now one should notice that the real rewards for actions carried out include a symbolic or positional component, which is poorly connected to the individual efforts and actions of the person. The higher the social step of the ladder or the pyramid of power, the more the compensational payments to the concrete actor occupying this niche has a positional character. To a certain degree, such a payment implies the unique character of the position, but sometimes it is just a compensation for social loyalty. The reason for such a situation is that the survival of any organization depends, first of all, on the loyalty of the people who manage it. Since frequent changes of managers of state posts, especially supreme ones, threaten instability and unsteadiness, the advantages of being on the upper floors of the social pyramid necessarily include a payment for loyalty, at least for an external one. The more the received goods, and the stronger the communication with the system, and the higher one can expect a person's loyalty to be. Certainly, it is unfair from the formal legal point of view. The person gets benefits neither for concrete works nor for rare qualities or abilities which he is expected to have. It is just compensation for structural defaults of the system. But accepting one challenge, the social system is faced with the other. Now it is necessary to take care of indemnifications for those who occupy the lowest levels of the society. In this case, the middle class gives indemnifications. In general, it occurs all costs of maintaining of state system development due to positional dividends for those who govern and internal system security due to compensational payments for those who can never actually change their statuses to higher ones. The positional structure of society differs from the meritocratic ideal considerably. For supporters of meritocracy, the ideal structure of society consists of three layers. First, the middle classes support the basic social loading on the social development and preservation of the society. Second, there are the lowest ones that are people who cannot compete with the majority equally for any reasons, and the supreme classes who either have unique abilities or skills or who are extremely lucky. The basic failure of meritocracy is its inability to define the reasons of the unequal resource distribution precisely. Certainly, according to the fundamental attribution mistake, people will always insist that their personal well-being is a result of their merits, whereas others probably get cash for loyalty to authorities, and in the case of failure, others are just too lazy or poorly educated. However, it is impossible for the researcher to rely on the expressed views of people while analyzing social system. Otherwise, we inevitably approach to the logical error. People do what they do. This doesn't mean that the problem is the individual life of concrete actors, although one needs to take into account this aspect too. If one examines society from the point of view of meritocracy theory, it is not clear there how resources for social maintenance are collected, and even unclear is how such resources are distributed. The supporters of meritocracy don't consider social aspects of the institutional architecture. Besides, it is rather difficult to define to what degree the success of the person depends on his personal efforts, and what part of the success is a structural or positional advantage. Because it is impossible to answer this question precisely, it is obvious that all attempts to compensate social injustice and to create equal opportunities for the lowest groups will lead only to positive discrimination, when people receiving privileges and goods from the system are not going to change anything in their life at all, and to live in a state of dependence. On the contrary, they are quite satisfied with those small compensations which they receive. What role is played with the alternatives of the social options there? It often happens so that the only class which can advantage of them is the middle one, and possibly some representatives of the lowest groups. The presence of some universities in one region adds almost nothing to the money box of options of the social outsiders, whose children more likely will face with serious difficulties as early as at the level of school or even kindergarten. Payments received by them are too insignificant also because of rather plenty of people which pretend to them. But the middle class is not homogeneous mass either. In turn, it consists of several layers. These people are not revolutionaries. They are not going to reject the system. On the contrary, they want to become part of it, and they aspire to carry out the structural assimilation, like Gordon said. And it is quite possible that new social options aid considerably those of its representatives who especially need such help. Besides, the variability of social alternatives reduces the motivation to choose the unique optimum decision carefully, and on the contrary, getting into a situation of logic deadlock, the social actor is compelled to find the unique solution among available ones. He just doesn't have another choice. This unique variant is found easily enough by using a method of looking over exceptions. But if there are several variants and if they are approximately equal, it is more difficult to make the choice correctly, and this creates psychological pressure upon the actor taking the decision. The horizontal organization of the range of social options makes the optimum decision an unobvious matter, and by that it reduces a psychological pressure, which will be shown necessarily in the case of the rigid vertical and unidirectional structure, closed or half-closed as well. There also appears a shift in personal responsibility. If restrictions and processes of social exception have an unobvious character, then inevitably some people will shift their criticism from the social structure to themselves. And although the variability often looks like an illusion, many people nevertheless will feel depressed because it would seem to them that they were mistaken and they have made a wrong choice. In fact, it is very difficult to be confident that you choose the right road and in the necessary direction. It is even more difficult to understand whether one has made enough attempts and spent enough time and resources to achieve the necessary result. It is possible to strengthen such psychological reaction artificially, if along with the standard of prosperity, ruling circles propagandize real examples of successful people constantly and suggest some recommendations as to how to become the same. Actions taken under these recommendations will not necessarily be directed at the achievement of concrete results. Many of them are made for the sake of actions themselves. Usually they play a role of psychological unloading, releasing the person from the imposed duty to react to external standards and challenges. Such hopes for improvement are rarely realized, being a kind of original variation of the new Monday illusion, when a person starts to think that it is still possible to have certain improvements within a new week. Thus, democracy is connected with the social variability directly. It helps satisfy some expectations among young people especially, but its theoretical foundations are a show window of illusory choice, which in many respects explains rather poorly the real structural restrictions constraining people, and sometimes, and in general, it speaks nothing on the occasion of them. I can give an example. The American society. The reasons for the horizontal social structure and the democratic development as a consequence underlie the distinguishing features of the past history there. As Margaret Mead emphasized, heterogeneity of social space has led to the absence of a national elite, at least in the European sense. Since a person occupying a high position in one community would not be able to occupy the same high position in a community of another state or coast in all cases. But the opposite is also true. Failures in promotion at one place don't mean necessarily that the same result will wait for him or her as the other one. Thus, there are some options of social mobility, unlimited at least theoretically, for everyone, and such mobility is closely connected with geographical mobility. Therefore, if for any reasons it is not possible to make a successful career at one place, the American can move easily to another one, retaining his potential for varying developments. It was simple to move at the end of 19th, the beginning of 20th centuries, especially before appearance of modern communications. And if it is more favorable to live in one place, the person will not move. Now one can consider the second challenge of the social system, the problem of the free rider, and in special case, the problem of strategic indifference of various strata of society in relation to any form of political organization and participation. There are many explanations of such situations. Theories of rational choice and collective action assert the reason is that indifference is remunerated for by the social system. The rational person wishing to satisfy his selfish needs prefers to avoid any actions with indistinct and unclear result, especially if such actions demand much time and significant resources. People always want to act so that to achieve the maximal benefits with the minimal efforts. It is so-called the optimum of social behavior. People don't necessarily succeed in choosing of such optimum, but they strive for it. Actually, one unresolved issue remains: how to convince people to depart from egoistic or individual strategies and to accept collective behavior once. That is, how to adopt, as Elinor Ostrom said, a situation from one in which act independently to one in which they adopt coordinated strategies to obtain higher joint benefits or reduce their joint harm. It is usually expected to convince people, using for example new education or methods of retraining, that the democratic choice appears the most successful and it will be connected to the further material benefits directly. But these views are premised, a simple precondition. People are democratic by their nature. Theorists of democracy really believe that people are democratic by their nature, even despite of lots of empirical and historical evidences that it is not so. Some argue that the more educated people, the more democratic they are. Thus, the problem is only reduced to an insufficient educational level, which in general is a classical basic point of the theory of collective actions. And though there is an insignificant minority which adheres to democratic views from internal incentives, it is obvious that in order to involve mainstream masses, one must use some additional stimulus. It is supposed that if one explains to people which advantages they can expect in the future in detail, the choice will be made automatically. Of course, only if internal barbarians who are not affected by such programs will not sabotage such an obvious decision again. Actually, for the ideologies wishing to create a new political system, the main problem is the problem of sabotage. So, how to convince people that the best structural organization of society is the democratic one? Enormous financial expenses on education and propaganda cause three reactions at least. Firstly, the propaganda of the democracy of show window results in the appearance of the increased expectations of people and hence it will lead to a sense of relative deprivation, even in situations when some improvements really occur. Secondly, strong social influence can be the cause of the opposite social reaction at a certain stage. The phenomenon, known to all psychologists and teachers as a reverse psychology, by which kids can frequently be expected to do the opposite of what they are told to do by an authority. As a third consequence, an external stimulus doesn't create conditions for the development of internal motivation. The person adapts a style of behavior according to external expectations, for example, to receive the necessary grant. But if stimulus is changing, if it is a switching on the other object or appearing of a new powerful financial source directed in other direction, such people change their views the same quickly. In social psychology and sociology, this phenomenon is labeled the insufficient justification effect. The absence of internal stimulus means the external incentives are not internalized, that is, they don't become internal and important for the person. There doesn't appear an understanding of the internal responsibility for accepted actions, and the behavior, like a spring, comes back to the initial point. The situation becomes even more complicated because it is not so easy to prove the physics of democratic advantages, even at the practical level. What does such a choice mean from the sociological point of view? If one doesn't take into account ideological interpretations, some versions about totalitarian character of this or that nation, so forth, the reason has structural character again, and it encounters the unevenness of social space development, and as a consequence, the unevenness of various sets of informal preferences among people. The features about the uneven character of social space will not be considered here. It is analyzed in detail in many works of world-renowned sociologists, especially from the French school. Besides, the previous analysis of the hierarchical social system has already been sufficient evidence of social heterogeneity, and it is also one of the reasons for institutional heterogeneity, and simultaneously its consequences. From the utilitarian point of view, democracy can be analyzed as a method of satisfaction of interests or needs of people. Institutional preferences of the person or household have a shared character. Some political organizational features of the societies, which are usually considered as democratic ones, are included into this package as its share. They are sometimes of great importance, sometimes they have smaller significance, and sometimes they mean almost nothing in general. And so it is difficult to define which needs have primordial character, except for some physiological ones, because they can block development of the person in case of their dissatisfaction. Historical evidences have shown that democratic aspiration didn't enter into the number of primordial needs. Certainly, if one could find some centers of the cerebral cortex or convolutions of the brain, such centers which are responsible for the realization of needs for democracy and freedom, like the existing centers of speech and thinking, after operating on which the person will have some corresponding problems. It would be a solid evidence for the advantages of theories of the given direction, but the existence of such centers hasn't been discovered yet. Strictly speaking, the need which is at a higher level arises not in cases when all other needs are satisfied, but when there appears an opportunity to satisfy a need easily, without significant expenses of time and energy. For example, when people come to the tourist center and visit some museums, it doesn't mean that they have already satisfied all other needs of lower levels completely. That means only that the social situation gives ideal chances for satisfaction of this very need with rather small expenses accordingly. Therefore, from the biological point of view, the need for freedom couldn't have arisen, and from the sociological point of view, such a need cannot be realized. If to use such an expression as an approximate metaphor, it is obvious that the need for freedom is detachable in the wide sense. In some cases, it can be exchanged for other, more significant things for the person. Total institutions give a great volume of privileges and the additional goods, whether it is the state's special services or private corporations, but they limit considerably the freedom of actions and judgments and force at least at the external level to accept norms of the corporate ethics simultaneously. In other words, according to the law of supply and demand, there is a price of democratic qualities in society. That is, a set of alternative variants for which people can refuse to keep for themselves a certain degree of freedom. If costs are too high, the choice will be negative. The time aberration shows that the interrelation between an elective process and the standard of life in any country has non-obvious character. Such interrelation can exist. Some researchers do believe that high levels of economic development usually mean a strong and rich civil society, high levels of literacy and education, urbanization, and development of independent media. But from the sociological point of view, just observation of statistical concurrencies is not enough. Let me summarize the contradiction described above in the compressed style. Behind the external facade of democracy, there are some undemocratic procedures in any case. Formally, all looks legitimate. Each person has one voice, and expressing his or her opinion, he can add it in the coin box of the future or present programs of any political party. Such a view is based on the belief that voices of all people are equal, but it is not so obvious. Preferences of people not speaking about alternative costs yet are shown differently. Therefore, cost of the voices, that is, the expenses connected to the participation in voting processes and taking a well-considered and full decision are different also. There are also different losses connected to wrong or erroneous choices made in this or that election. It seems that only the minority is often the most interested party in the best decision because it will meet with the losses in case of the erroneous choice. Therefore, only among equal parties the democratic voting can be used as a form of arriving at the optimal decision. The point here is not in egalitarian tendencies, but that all parties should be sensitive to losses in case of unsuccessful choice equally. If one party has more risks and the other party has less ones, there appears a danger of blackmail through the use of the heavy assumed losses of the former party. The other explanation of the manipulative nature of democracy is as follows. Actors don't know positions that they or their opponents will occupy in decision-making institutions in the future. Taking into account this veil of ignorance, or the cloud of unknowing, each actor has incentive to create institutions that will benefit him under all circumstances. As the public entrepreneurs have always imperfect knowledge and the social situation is characterized by uncertainty, the evolution of the institutional framework never reaches a state of equilibrium. Any social system with a set of already developed connections and relations among separated elements is adapted to its own reproduction in the best way. In society where decisions are often taken on the basis of the administrative functions of the official, so-called telephone law, and informal connections, investments in this very form of long-term social capital will be the most effective means of the resolution of future problems. This process looks like the model of competitive assimilation, which David Latin has developed on the basis of the analysis of the Russian-speaking population's behavior in the Baltic countries. Based on the theory of rational choice and focus on the importance of language as a determinant of Russian speakers entering the citizen polity, he hypothesized that the best individual strategy, which will give the most chances to secure a place in an upwardly mobile employment market, is a rapid training in the titular nation languages. Since any parent realizes that other parents will be likely to do the same, they will try to educate their offspring in the language of local statehood. If not to consider the substantive assumptions of such a model, it is rather difficult to reduce ethnicity only to external rationality in any way. It is possible to apply these theoretical conclusions to the processes of institutional developments of democracy. If influential actors of business consider that the most effective way of providing security for their property is informal connections with officials, they will choose a strategy of behavior. Otherwise, there is a danger to lose in the competitive struggle. Formal rules will not be rejected directly. More likely, actors will just start to search for ways of their evasion in daily activity. Rational behavior assumes that the person will not act to harm himself. So one can expect that strategic actors will, as Knight said, seek those institutional rules that give them the greatest share of benefits. The orientation of social expectations also influences behavior. One should not, of course, overestimate individual rationality. The rational behavior of each separated actor can lead to a general irrational result which is perfectly known from the classical prisoner's dilemma and tragedies of common pastures. But on the whole, each rationality provides for the preservation of social system, or more precisely, it prevents it from changing. Because in fact, if one of the actors breaks the accepted rules and thus receives unfair advantages, there appears an inevitable shift of the functional efficiency. Now the social system will try to return by using sanctions to the situation of dynamic equilibrium when, as Knight said in 1992, no single player would have obtained a larger payoff had she used an alternative strategy given the strategies of the other players? The mechanism of institutional development is closely connected to the necessity to preserve the structural foundations of the social system. But first of all, one should consider the mechanisms of institutional innovations and the impact on the social structure. Such innovations usually change the social structure fundamentally. For example, if some members of communities get an advantage in one of the social spheres by chance, they transfer this experience further to relatives or close friends. Such innovations often attract the most educated and talented people, especially from the off. It means that in the long-term perspective, the new institution will be more effective than the old one. The influx of new resources and staff members is capable to win over old institutions and customs. Since the initial experience was successful, otherwise social transmission is not formed. This applied by more people. Finally, the new generation of successful inventors has some initial advantages already in comparison with members of other communities because they know best how to operate in the given sphere. Such advantages can become negative in cases when there are external changes or challenges which put into use the next social practice. In that case, the mechanisms of social delay can hinder the new group. It is more difficult for them to refuse from all the new experience which was successful as well, to accept the old practice, for example, which has not so clear consequences of its application in comparison with the present one. If the new practice appears successful, the old group loses social competition and falls to the position of outsiders. Thus, in order to preserve a steady development, there should be a degree of certain mutations in society, attempts of innovative development instead of the continuation of old ways. And the prospects for social mutants look like biological ones a bit. Their survival is not an action of only personal efforts and enterprise. It is also a structural problem and a huge historical case. However, there should not be a lot of innovations in the society. Otherwise, the most part of the community's resources will be spent in vain. Because it is impossible to guarantee the successful result of all innovations, most innovative attempts will lead to nothing. The success of social transmission depends on several factors, but first of all, it is a reliability of the source, which transfers innovative experience and degrees of its influence on the recipient. It is obvious that every new generation should decide for themselves what exactly they want to borrow from the practice of their parents. It is necessary to take into account that both successful and unsuccessful social experience is transferred, because to distinguish which elements are successful and which are not is not so easy in the beginning. On the other hand, every generation creates new strategies or their separate elements which didn't exist in the past to put them into the present social practice. But even here, the estimation of new variants is carried out in many respects by using analogies with all institutional practices. For example, if a businessman or a group of some people has chosen the opposite style of behavior compared to the mainstream of the society and have refused to maintain informal bureaucratic ties, the result of such choice will be more likely a loss in the competitive struggle and the subsequent bankruptcy, and it will also be a refusal of all other interested actors to use similar attempts in the nearest future. In all other words, the application of new social practice has unjustified character in this case, too great risks to lose in the competitive struggle. There is a social law in this mechanism which provides for social non-preservation. Any radical deviations from the given way tend to return to a median line. From the evolutionary point of view, such a mechanism provided the survival of community. Otherwise, all new leaders would begin radical transformations, renouncing from the past completely. It is clear that such activity could result either in successful outcome or in unsuccessful one, with two corresponding variants, prosperity or catastrophe. But infinite enumeration of possibilities means that a part of them appears erroneous, so even the single mistake could become the last one and lead to the destruction of the community. The mechanism of social innovation blockage looks like a biological protection against the intrusion of a foreign substance into the human organism. It can be that some new substances or even microorganisms could benefit actually, but as the price of a mistake is too great, the organism is programmed to destroy everything that differs from the parameters preset during the evolutionary development. The given norm doesn't promote social development so well, but it doesn't facilitate destruction. There is a kind of protection against fools in it. Kind of arrow wrote that the societies in the evolution have developed implicit agreements, agreements which are essential to the survival of the society or at least contribute greatly to the efficiency of its working. From the methodological point of view, the problem of democracy consists in the off-system formulation of objective. There is a mathematical theorem of Hegel, who suggested that in any abstract system of knowledge beginning from a certain level of complexity, there are always true statements which cannot be proved by means of the system, and there are false statements which cannot be denied. In other words, as Podyakov said in 1997, the validity of system statements in each sufficiently powerful system cannot be defined within the framework of the system. That is, in any system there are problems which cannot be resolved within its frameworks and by using its means. For the achievement of this objective, it is necessary to pass on to the next level, which is higher than the current system. The contrary statement is also true. There are off-system objectives which cannot be achieved within the framework of the given system. There are goals which are obviously unachievable. That is, if the decision has an external character in relation to the system, there appears a complexity in searches of internal system support for the decision. There appears a gap between formally set purposes and actual opportunities, and peculiar upward distortions, and pulling the results received within the system up to the parameters set formally before. Thus, in the social sphere, there appears a ground for misuse and corruption. Social systems don't in fact depend on the will of people. They cannot be created from nothing, and if a goal is external and it is not connected to the system, practically it cannot be achieved. Besides, social laws act the same way the physical ones do, and it is not possible to cancel them, although some Western social scientists prefer to consider that social laws and physical ones are not the same. They are certainly different in object, actions, and methods of scientific investigation, but the result of their false understanding looks similar. The forcible behavior in relation to natural and technical systems leads to a catastrophe. Similar catastrophe can happen in case of violation of social laws. For example, one can remember an attempt to organize a continental blockade by the French emperor, but that attempt to deny objective laws of economic integration and capitalist market led to nothing. In theory, it is possible to change the system by external incentives, yet in practice it is necessary to agree beforehand who among actors will carry out transformational costs, or to distribute them among the interested parties inevitably. Otherwise, rural elites shift this cost to the lowest social stratum, and it doesn't help transformations to gain popularity. The last examined challenge is the functional autonomy of power institutions. After creating any social mechanism aimed at the decision of any function, there is always a probability of the closure in itself, and its further use in the interest of the bureaucrats, who are now managing this mechanism. Research in the field of management has shown that in bureaucratic organizations there is a shift from the purposes which are put by the government to the purposes which are more suitable to the narrow interests of the bureaucracy. These goals include, in order of priority, protecting the organization itself, expanding its role and usually budget, and carrying out the policies of the government that the bureaucracy serves. It is rather difficult to improve such a system. If we create a criterion function under realization of the concrete program, one needs to take into account not only that the end justifies the means. There is a probability that the bureaucratic mechanism will exist even after finishing the program and realizing the end. Therefore, institutions designed to promote democracy can involve significant costs and finally deviate from the stated goal of democracy promotion. There are some unpredicted consequences in the system of procedural democracy as well. As a whole, the procedure has an important meaning. It is procedural democracy which is inherent in the Saxon countries, but the successive realization of a procedure, not directly on changes of external and internal conditions, can lead to similar absurd situations, including the destruction of the system. Democracy is frequently understood as a power of majority, but in some cases, the rash decisions accepted by it can lead to the negative impact on the society. And if one provides some exceptions and the situations of the exit from procedures, there appears a functional autonomy from which one will need to live, because the first exception in the rules results in the second, then the next, etc. In any case, the question is about a relative choice between the efficiency of the concrete social decision and the necessity to keep frame rules to maintain the system, and the adjustment to the existing structure will inevitably be characterized as adaptation. Such dilemmas are inherent not only in the social sphere but also in the biological world. It is necessary to have a certain institutional flexibility in situations of greater importance for society, but there is a danger of abusing such exceptions. Therefore, the problem of democracy is also the problem of the control over choosing of exceptions, who will determine that in some cases democratic procedures are unacceptable and whether it is possible to sacrifice the tactical benefits of democracy for the sake of the greater strategic advantages. If there is a central zone of culture, like Shields said in 1961 in society, and all basic social forces and groups agree with the certain estimations of it, such feasible and comprehensible decisions in a given question can still be found. But what if such a cultural zone doesn't exist? Despite many structural defects for which one is hardly likely to find suitable solutions, some indisputable advantages can be written down on the credit side of democracy. First, democracy helps people realize the need for participation in decision-making. It provides opportunities for political self-expression. Personal experience participating in local government, a legislative committee, or a public commission is the most convincing argument for the advantages of democracy for people who have such experience. Thus, it forms a loyalty which goes beyond a local community or a religious group and unites the nation. Certainly, in this variant, the instrumentalist and expressive values of choosing the democratic alternative should coincide with each other. To some extent, democracy corresponding to the spirit of the time provides a kind of external legitimacy and external prestiginess, which help people to realize needs for psychological and informational inclusions and also for an enlightened image in the face of significant others. Democracy is also connected to state stability, directly in relation to external challenges. Historical research has shown that the states bestowing different rights and freedoms to the citizens in 18th and 19th centuries, especially in the sphere of the creation of civil society organizations, has facilitated the strengthening, essentially, the mobilization potential of states and, for example, the creation of mass armies. Accepting and recognizing the rights of all citizens living in a given territory, the government has gained access to the use of significant resources of the society. The distribution of general rights and the reduction of the importance of the class principle has led to the same universal distribution of duties, including state and military services, and it happened in the times of the French and American revolutions, yielding part of social management to broad masses, and especially to the federal state. The state machinery has received a source of additional resources and resources that could be used with minimal cost. Since then, such situation has changed a little. Any strengthening of the social mobilization potential demanded in the past and demands from the state now to give some benefits and freedoms to the citizens. When for various reasons it was not possible to do so, the mass army also scattered and deserted. The institutional features of the democratic structure analyzed above have controversial character. Depending on ideological preferences, democracy for different people means different things. Implemented reforms on the political transformation are often insufficient, and one needs a democratic deepening in order to integrate democracy into the political culture. The social sciences are expected to help with the resolution of this problem, but it doesn't mean that it is necessary to replace scientific discourse with ideological roles, then the situation becomes a deadlock, and dispute among supporters of various ideologies looks like a conversation of the Adventists with the Buddhists. At best, the sides can listen to each other calmly, but they don't hear each other because the arguments of each side are characterized by ideological cliché. Everything which is not contained in the drawn frameworks is rejected at once. The actors speak using waves of different length. The ideologization of social science is its disintegration, because opposite views coexist only at different levels and they don't meet each other, and the all inconvenient and hard to deny arguments can be ideologically labeled just non-political correctness, the conservatism, non-acceptance of sensational results and interpretations, and the requirement of precise definitions, possibly even operationalizations of classical positivistic schools is even more often put under doubt now. Are other alternative views in reality surrounding us? Can there be a liberal science and will it result in the realization of overall forecasts? There are no precise answers to such questions in the scientific community now. This paper also doesn't pretend to a final conclusion. As one Soviet philosopher said, we speak just in support of clarification of the true historical dialectics, which on the one hand doesn't allow people only to gain, not losing anything from what they to lose they would not desire, and on the other hand is capable to claim for the lost unexpectedly on a new coil of its development and, contrary to everything, to make people strictly responsible for its non-safe keeping. Theories of democracy reflect all the complexities of the ambiguous times in which we live, and in any case, questions of the essence of democracy, its institutional foundations, and the functions these institutions carry out will cause heated arguments not only in academic circles, but also in society as a whole.